Up, therefore, House Bill 1096, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia relating to regulation of firearms by state entities. Report from the Committee on Militia, Police, and Public Safety with a substitute.
The gentleman from Fauquier, Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. Substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Fauquier.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what 1096 does is it essentially puts us in a statute where we were before the governor's executive order this summer, and so that we can conceal carry in state buildings.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Simon.
Mr. Speaker, would the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
I will yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, this bill says that no agency can propose any rule or regulation or have any policy regarding firearms. So does that mean that the signs that we started to see popping up around Capitol Square and a number of these executive buildings that have a little gun and a red circle and a slash through it are going to go away? You're going to not be able to tell folks they can't bring a gun into an executive building? Is that right?
Mr. Speaker, I would tell the gentleman that he is correct.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for a further question?
Gentleman yield.
I will not.
Gentleman declines yield.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has floor.
Mr. Speaker, this bill was drafted very broadly to have the widest possible application and leave very little room for anybody to try and wiggle their way out of it. And we've heard a little bit of speculation as to why that might be. And in fact, this is a House substitute because we had to send back the original version of the bill because it had some unintended consequences. It was drafted so broadly that it would have included universities, community colleges, institutions of higher education, and all the campus police folks showed up in committee to object to that. So we took that out. But we didn't take out a number of state agencies. We didn't take out, for instance, we have an exception for the Virginia State Police. We don't have an exception for the Capitol Police. We don't have an exception for the Virginia Supreme Court or the Court of Appeals. So arguably under this statute, the way it's drafted, the way I read it, I would have asked these as questions, maybe I'm wrong, but the way I read it, the Supreme Court can't put up a sign that says no weapons entered into because they are a state agency and they're not explicitly exempted from this bill. The same thing for the Department of Forensic Science, which is our medical examiner's office. Same thing for the Virginia Parole Board. So, Mr. Speaker, I would urge folks, I understand what this bill is trying to do and what it's trying to reverse. I think it may be written a little too broadly. I think it probably has some unintended consequences, and I would hope there would be the will of the body to vote no and not engross this bill and pass it on to its third reading.
The gentleman, Prince William, Mr. Lingenfelder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking of the bill,
The gentleman has floor.
I would urge the body to support this bill. I think it's unfortunate that this executive order was brought forward in the first place. When we do public policy, particularly around the issue of public safety, there should be a true and clear basis for that policy. You just don't have this sort of plethora of shootings going on in state buildings. It's not going on. And so, to a certain extent, this might have been addressed if someone had brought us clear evidence that there was a problem. No such evidence was brought forward. And on top of that, it is my understanding from discussions that I have had personally with both the Virginia State Police and the Capitol Police that they were never queried on whether or not this was a necessary policy. So I understand the concern, the expressed concern of the administration, but I believe that the order in and of itself was bad policy because it was not based on good facts. And so I would urge the body to support the bill.
Gentleman Fauquier, Mr. Weber.
Thank you. I forgot to ask the body to move the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Okay, thank you. Gentlewoman from Fairfax, Ms. Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker. My mother used to say, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And whatever you may say about the executive order, The bill before us, again, is extraordinarily broadly written. When I look at the words that start on line 15 and are repeated on line 20, purchase, possession, transfer, ownership, carrying, storage, or transportation of firearms. So we're telling an agency that unless we pass a statute, you cannot have any policies about purchasing that weapon. Now, are we going to go in and micromanage exactly what if an agency has a need for firearms in its mission? Are we going to go in and micromanage and talk about exactly what you're supposed to do as far as the purchase of those weapons, or the transfer of those weapons, or the ownership of those weapons? Again, this is really much too broadly stated and should not be passed in reaction to a much more narrow executive order about the carrying of weapons in agencies. Thank you.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Turning to page 18 of the printed calendar, House Bill 1000.